Hello, I'm Francis Pindar and I've got a passion for security. I specialised in security and cryptography at university and I've been working in Salesforce for around 12 plus years now. So very quickly, this is me on a page. I'm co-founder of this event, London's Calling, and I think this is the first official session I've done at London's Calling because I'm usually completely maxed out running the event and I don't actually have time for a talk unless there's a gap in the schedule and I have to jump in like this talk here. But I've been also a speaker at Dreamforce since 2012 and other tech events around the world, and also I've helped start and run the London developer and admin user groups. I'm an 8-time Salesforce MVP and MVP Hall of Famer, and that's actually a picture of us, all the MVPs, about 7 years ago. So it's now grown. There's now 250 Salesforce MVPs across the globe. And actually we've got a couple of new MVPs presenting at London's Calling today. I'm also a trainer of Salesforce, teach Salesforce to over 60,000 students across the world in 157 different countries. And you can find out more about that at admin2architect.com. I'm also a trustee of a UK charity and currently work as a cloud architect for a UK bank. And my claim to fame is that I was also Fred Weasley's stunt double in a Harry Potter film. So back to the actual talk. What is MFA anyway? So I'm going to be talking about a bit of an overview on MFA and what it is and why it's so important. I'm also going to take a look at the kind of potential extra costs and issues around MFA that you need to kind of resolve within your organization. We're also going to look at the different MFA solutions for Salesforce, as well as a bit of a rollout, how to roll out MFA in your organization, and a final wrap up. So Salesforce understands that confidentiality, integrity and availability of Salesforce data is vital for their customers, and they take the protection of customer data very seriously. But security threats are growing increasingly common, so it's essential that everyone implements stronger measures of account access security to protect their customers and their businesses. And one of the ways you can mitigate some of these threats is by implementing multi-factor authentication for all your users. Now, this actually has been around for quite a while on the Salesforce platform, but Salesforce has announced that this is going to be enforced in all Salesforce orgs, and the date that this is going to become required is the 1st of February 2022. So now this may seem a long way off yet, or maybe a little bit sooner if you're kind of watching this video a bit later on, but there's a lot of things to consider. So I'm going to go through how you set up MFA and some of the considerations. So Salesforce builds security into everything that they do from the ground up, but their commitment to delivering secure products is only half the story, because security is a shared responsibility between Salesforce and us, their customers. As a steward for your business's security, you play a critical role in safeguarding your data. Now, it's kind of commonly said that data is the new oil in town, and data being the secret sauce for companies to target prospects and sell more efficiently than ever before. So protecting this data is becoming increasingly important. It's also that security threats are growing increasingly common and more sophisticated, as bad actors have started switching their methods of attack as the traditional exploits become harder to exploit. So this is a representation taken from Information is Beautiful, and it shows you which companies have been compromised in one shape or another over the last 10 years. And it's not always because the system has been hacked. Sometimes it's an inside job. Sometimes someone's just left information on a device out in the open, but other times it's just a lack of security. Or even someone has misconfigured a web server, potentially leaving your information out in the open. Now, what's great with Salesforce is they handle a lot of this for you, as I mentioned previously, so you don't have to worry about the misconfigured web server. But your Salesforce data is valuable, and you could still be a target for bad actors in other ways. And a key part of your security strategy is safeguarding access to your Salesforce user accounts. Now, one of the simplest, most effective ways to prevent unauthorized account access is to protect your Salesforce products and data using a multi-factor authentication device. Now, MFA adds an extra layer of security to your login process by requiring users to verify their identity with 2 or more pieces of evidence or factors. Now, this is to prove who they are, who they say they are when they log in. Now, these factors are something the user knows, such as a username or password combination, plus something that they have, like a code on an authentication on a mobile device or security key. A familiar example of MFA in action is 2 factors needed to withdraw money from a cash machine or ATM. Your card is something that you have, and your PIN is something that you know. So, using usernames and passwords alone don't provide sufficient protection because it's very easy for bad actors to exploit weak or reuse passwords through a common types of attack like phishing and credential stuffing. Now, phishing especially was one of the most successful attack vectors last year. Phishing was the top threat action and was involved in 32% of the confirmed breaches and 78% of cyber espionage incidents, with 28% of breaches involved in malware infections and 29% involved the use of stolen credentials, both of which frequently accomplished through phishing attacks. And finally, 30% of phishing messages are opened by their target users. MFA helps protect against these types of attack, so that even if a user's password is stolen, the odds are very low that the attacker will be able to hack the second factor from the user's authentication app or hardware token, because MFI ties the user's access to multiple different categories of verification methods. It's much harder for threats like phishing attacks to succeed, which ultimately makes your Salesforce environment safer from unauthorized access by bad actors. So you may currently have authentication methods in place for your Salesforce products. Now, here's how to weigh those up against the MFA solution. First up, we have device activation, or MFA. Now, in Marketing Cloud, this is called identity verification. Device activation requires a user to provide a second verification method when accessing Salesforce from an unrecognized browser or application. Now, while device activation provides protection, it has some limitations because it doesn't apply to every login, and users can use email or SMS as factors which aren't strong verification methods. Some email systems on the internet still send emails as plain text, so that essentially any of that can be intercepted, as well as mobile apps on your phone that can read your text messages. So device activation is sometimes confused with MFA because it requires a second factor, but the significant differences are that MFA requires users to provide a strong verification method every time they log in. Single sign-on is a great way to implement your user's login experience, and it also reduces some of the risks associated with weak passwords or reused passwords or trying to remember multiple passwords within your organization. If your users regularly access multiple apps in the course of their day, I strongly suggest using an identity provider to provide secure a further secure Salesforce and other applications. With a well-implemented SSO strategy, you can reduce password-related risks, improve authentication processes, and make it easier for your users to log in to those frequently used applications. Now, if you currently have an IDP and have implemented an SSO solution for your Salesforce instance, you won't be technically affected by Salesforce when Salesforce makes MFA required for all users. But you are required to implement MFA if you use single sign-on, so be aware with that. But considering that passwords are commonly targeted by attack methods such as phishing, there's still a chance that your user accounts could be compromised if an SSO implementation relies on user credentials alone. So you really do need to implement MFA on it. If you have an SSO solution, Salesforce requires enabling MFA for your identity provider as an additional safeguard. You do have the option, though, of just having your single sign-on not use its own MFA, and you could use the Salesforce MFA, or you could not use the Salesforce MFA and use the single sign-on, your IDP's MFA implementation instead. So what are the MFA solutions for Salesforce? So for MFA, Salesforce supports strong verification methods only, and that is a factor that the user must have in their possession. They don't allow email or SMS text messages as the verification method for MFA because email credentials can be compromised and text messages can be intercepted. It's a lot harder for bad actors to get control of an actual mobile device or hardware security key than it is to infiltrate an email account or hack a cell phone number. Depending on your Salesforce product, Salesforce supports all these types of strong authentication factors. Salesforce Authenticator mobile app, third-party time-based one-time password authenticator apps such as Google Authenticator or Authy, physical security keys like YubiKey, Google Titan Security, and I actually have a YubiKey right here on my keyring that I use. You can also choose from choose these options or a number of options that best work for your business and your users' needs. So there are a couple of things you need to understand when you're implementing MFA, and that is at the moment you may have multiple users logging in using the same login, and if this is the case, then you're going to have problems implementing MFA because essentially those users have to have the same device on them. So if you're doing job sharing within the business and things like that, you need to find out if this is going to affect you and if you need to buy more licenses from Salesforce. Also, do you have any partners or anything that connect to your Salesforce or maybe to offer support? Because those partners, if they have a 24/7 support agreement with you, may need extra logins created to support you all the way around the globe. But Salesforce may be coming out with a solution for this, although I have no idea when or if that's going to happen. There's also a couple of other questions that I kind of get regularly about this. One of them is the API users. So if I've got some credentials where it's just being integrated into by an external system, how do you do MFA in that case? And actually Salesforce exempts the use of MFA for logins via the API. There are a couple of other questions that are kind of still outstanding that we're trying to get the bottom of. Things like login as permission, does that still work or not? Also, how would scratch orgs work? And also what happens if a user loses their phone or device. Now, Salesforce does allow you to create one-time passwords, but these are all the things you kind of need to think of, and we'll go to that. So one of the things that you really do need to be careful with is once you start implementing MFA, you still got to train the users. You've got to get them to adopt it and give them the reasons why it's important, because we do not want this happening. Now, this is from a store in Australia where they've implemented MFA, but the users have just sellotaped the username and password and the MFA token. You can see that RSA secure ID, which is that secure authentication factor, and it becomes pointless because then anybody can access it. So today, these Salesforce products have MFA support. Products built on the Salesforce platform. This is Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, Analytics Cloud, B2B Commerce Cloud, Experience Cloud, industry products including Consumer Goods Cloud, Education Cloud, Financial Services Cloud, Government Cloud, Health Cloud, Manufacturing Cloud, Non-Profit Cloud, I can't even say the word cloud, and also the core platform, Salesforce Essentials, Salesforce Field Service, and other partner solutions, including Pardot, B2B Commerce Cloud, and Marketing Cloud, as well as MuleSoft, Anypoint platform, and finally, Quip. But going forward, Salesforce are making it their priority to provide the strongest authentication capabilities across the clouds, including delivering MFA functionality for all Salesforce products. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm just focusing on the MFA solutions for the Salesforce products that are accessed from Lightning Experience or the Salesforce Classic Experience. So basically all the products that are on this slide, with the exception of Salesforce B2C Commerce. So for manageability, I recommend approaching your MFA project in 3 phases. The first one is getting ready. Start by evaluating and planning the work. Second, in rollout, is do your change management and implementation work and then launch MFA to your users. Then there's managing, so making sure your users are adopting MFA and getting the support they need. Now, for each phase, I suggest breaking things down into a few stages, each with a set of recommended activities. So let's take a closer look. So kicking off your MFA project with a discovery and planning period. So this is when you want to learn, review available resource and understand why we strongly recommend MFA for enhanced login security, what your MFA options are for Salesforce products and how your company will benefit when you enable MFA. Next up, we have evaluate. So this is where we start your project with an evaluation period to identify your requirements for an MFA solution and gather the data that's key to getting alignment with leadership, as well as developing a plan. So recommended activities at this stage could include requirements to determine the MFA implementation that will work best for your company, defining the business requirements and understand your users' needs for a productive experience, then review this criteria against the MFA options from Salesforce to decide on the verification methods that work for you in your use cases. Then the user inventory, get a sense of the level of effort for your project by doing an inventory of all existing Salesforce users. Identify the types of users and roles that exist, such as admins, contractors, non-human accounts, and catalog the permissions that are assigned to each user. Now, this exercise really does help you by identifying all those privileged users, including employees with administrator permissions or permissions that grant a high level of access to the application and sensitive data. Now, these are permissions like the add and modify users or modify all data permissions within the profiles and permission sets. And these should be your top priority when rolling out MFA because their accounts pose the highest risk if they become compromised. See how well you're applying the principle of least privilege. Now, for your user accounts, because users should have the minimum set of permissions needed to do their jobs. So if an attacker manages to access an account, they're limited in what they can do. With this exercise, you can see places where you should dial back permissions to reduce the number of privileged users in your environment. And then you can make the case. Share your findings with key leaders and stakeholders to make your case for MFA and get alignment on your project's goals. Now it's up to planning. So after you complete an evaluation period, you're ready to develop your project plan. So the recommended factoring in these subjects are a rollout strategy. So defining who you're going to roll MFA and how you're going to structure and execute the rollout processes. And there's two ways you can approach the rollout. If you have a small number of Salesforce users, roll out to everyone in the same day. But if you have a larger user base, consider phasing the approach, where you roll out to groups of users at a time. For either approach, I recommend starting with a small pilot to serve as a proof of concept before deploying anything else. A pilot lets you kind of test the rollout process and the user experience, collect feedback of what works and what needs tweaking, or what resources or gaps you have found within the support mechanisms you've designed. You can focus your pilot on admin users or go for a broader cross-section of Salesforce users. That will verify things that work well for all your audiences. If you go with a phased rollout, admins and other privileged users should be your top priority because they have the kinds of the permissions that make accounts desirable for targets, and they're a higher risk to gaining access. Configuration management strategy. Now, this is where you define the tactics and the activities you'll leverage throughout the project to prepare your users for MFA. To get your users on board, you'll need to show everyone the value of using MFA and make sure they know what's happening ahead of time. So I kind of recommend have a plan of how you're going to handle ongoing operations after the rollout of MFA and who will own these responsibilities. For example, your help desk. The plan should define the document, policies and processes for common issues such as solving login problems, including failed authentication attempts and account lockouts, helping users recover access if they've lost or forgotten their verification methods. We'll talk more about this a bit later on. Enabling MFA for users. You should also update your user onboarding procedures so new hires get MFA on day one, and MFA registration assistance is included in your new employee onboarding processes. And also provisioning and deploying those factors to your users. For implementation and testing, define the requirements and acceptance criteria and schedule for setting up and testing your implementation. Decide on the processes and timeline for deploying verification methods to your users. It's kind of ideal to do this before you turn on MFA for your users. Now, if you're in the core org, you can test your implementation, executing your enablement steps in a sandbox or in a developer org, and then you can go through the registration flow for each of your verification methods. You're allowing to make sure that you can successfully connect to your Salesforce account and log in. Use test accounts instead of your own accounts so you don't inadvertently lock yourself out. It's also a good idea to verify that your recovery process works as expected, including generating and entering temporary verification codes. So the creation. So when you finish planning and ready to deliver MFA to your Salesforce users, there's really kind of this recommended approach. Now, if you're rolling out in phases, you'll just repeat these steps until everyone is using MFA. So preparing your users, making sure they're ready by putting your change management into action. Busy users aren't always receptive to change. So your objective is to win the hearts and minds with different types of activity. So communications and campaigns that tell the users that MFA is coming, why it's important. I've created a chatter group in the past to announce that it's happening so that you can get questions and answers and peer collaboration on the new change. This is also a great place to share regular updates on the scheduled launch. Build an awareness with promotional campaigns, so pinning up posters in the office. as well as other kind of collateral you can get. Or just run a week-long email drip campaign that introduces users to what MFA is, because it helps to visualize the change to the login process and provides tips and tricks so they'll be ready when you turn MFA. Also, a top tip is to download the 2FA dashboard app exchange package that you can use. So then you want to train your users on how to obtain and set up and use the verification method to log in, create an on-demand learning materials such as video or direct content, or even the user authentication module on Trailhead. And you may also want to build in-person training if you can, if the lockdown is kind of lifted by then, or webinars and kind of lunch and learn sessions and things like that. So we come to implementation. In conjunction with the change management activities, kick off your implementation tasks, including preparing your support team to handle MFA issues. You can delegate admin tasks related to lost and forgotten factors to your help desk. Simply assign them and manage two-factor authentication in the user interface permissions to the appropriate users. This permission allows help desk staff to handle activities like generating temporary verification codes, disconnecting lost factors, or factors belonging to employees that are leaving the company or changed roles, and replacing lost security keys. Then we want to execute your test plan, making sure MFA implementation works as expected, including the registration and login flows of each of the verification methods you're supporting, and the recovery process if a user doesn't have their factor. Then we have deploying the verification methods to your users. If you're using physical security keys, you need to enable this to support before handing out the keys, regardless of the types of factors you've decided to support for your implementation. I strongly recommend deploying them to users before you turn on MFA. Doing this step prior to your go live lets users get a head start by registering the factors ahead of time and reduces the chances of people having login problems on the day. All users, including yourself, who've been enabled for MFA must register at least one verification method. This process connects the factor to the user's Salesforce account so that you can use the factor to verify their identity when logging in. Also, consider holding a few enrollment sessions or office hours ahead of your launch day so users can get help with their factor registration process if needed. Then it's the launch. It's the big launch day. So it's enabling your users for MFA in your Salesforce org. Now, if you do this using custom profiles by assigning, you can use this by using your custom profiles by assigning the two-factor authentication user permission, or what I think is better is actually creating a permission set that includes the two-factor authentication for user interface logins user permission, then applying this permission set to those desired users. Users will then register their factors. Now, as mentioned in the deploy factors section, MFA enabled users must register at least one factor before they're able to log into Salesforce. Now, this registration process walks them through connecting their factor to Salesforce, their Salesforce account, so they can use the factor to verify their identity when logging in. Now, if a user didn't register a factor before your launch day, they are prompted to do so the first time they log in after MFA is enabled. And they'll go through a wizard or screen prompts to guide them through the process of signing up their registration. Then we're engaging on launch day and doing support activities like firing up your help desk to get them ready and pumped for helping and supporting the users and resolving issues on authentications and logging in. Staff on an on-site help desk could have in-person office hours. I also would suggest having an SOS process for execs and business users who need priority help. So you could also have, inject a bit of fun into it as well, having goodie bags, swag bags and a launch party and stuff during the day as well, which is kind of cool. So it's actually really easy to enable MFA in your org. Now, I recommended creating an MFA permission set from setup. So dive into the permission sets, and then just using the quick search in the search bar, under the permission sets, just click the new link and to create that new permission set and give it a name like new MFA perm set or something like that. And then you want to hit the tab to automatically populate the API field. Then you want to select the license for the permission set. So just use the one that's applicable to you and click Save. Then click on the system settings and scroll down to two-factor authentication for user interface logins. Select the user permission checkbox and save the permission set. Now you can assign the permission set to users from the newly created permission set. Click on the Manage Assignments and just click Add to your assignments and select yourself as the admin to enable MFA on your own account. You can assign the permission set to more users when you're ready to do the rollout of MFA. And then all you have to do is click Assign. After MFA is enabled, all affected users must register a factor or factors to connect them to their Salesforce accounts. On your launch date, plan to support the users with this process. After your rollout, ensure the success of your project with these activities. First, measure it. Keep an eye on how your users are experiencing MFA and look for problem areas you should address. Collect user feedback to learn what's working and what's not. Monitor metrics on usage patterns and to see how well MFA is reducing risk to and understand the health of your implementation and where you can make improvements. Customize a list view of users or check the identity verification methods report to see who's using which verification method. Run reports to track adoption over time or create custom reports to spot patterns in MFA behavior in your org or community. You can also install the two-factor authentication dashboard app, which you can download from the Salesforce App Exchange. Then we have support. Now you or your help desk will need to support users with ongoing day-to-day operations, including troubleshooting and resolving login and authentication problems, including account lockouts, helping users recover access if they've lost or forgotten their verification methods, removing users' current session and re-authenticating them, disconnecting lost verification methods, and even just auditing the user's activity, going back to before they reported the lost factor to see if it's been used and there's been any unusual activity. Help the user get back to work immediately via a temporary verification code and walk them through the process to acquire a replacement device. Expire your user's temporary verification code when it's no longer needed. Now, enabling MFA for new employees is part of your new onboarding hiring process and provisioning and deploying new and replacement verification methods. Finally, we've got optimization or optimize, so looking ways to improve your MFA implementation as well as your overall security posture. So plan periodic reviews of your MFA implementation to verify it's still meeting the needs of your users. Review new verification method technology as it becomes available to look for new opportunities to streamline the user experience. Finally, you could actually have a look at enabling the Lightning login to give users fast and convenient and secure password-free logins. Now, this delivers multi-factor authentication through the use of Salesforce Authenticator, something the user has, and entering a PIN or biometric scan on the mobile device, something that the user is. You can find out more about this in the Salesforce help. Keep your customers safe and your data protected. Consider additional best practices, tools, and technology to improve your defense in-depth strategy. For enhanced login security, implement controls like login IP range restrictions. You can also consolidate passwords with a password manager, which I use myself. I use LastPass. Review your overall Salesforce security settings to evaluate ways security can be enhanced to address any existing risks. There's also the health check tool within Salesforce. If you go into setup and search for the security health check, that is a great tool to looking at the risks of your org and running some mitigations to fix those issues. You can also use Salesforce Shield to build a whole new level of trust and transparency and compliance and governance directly inside your business critical app. There's also, Salesforce has released this new multi-factor authentication assistant within your Salesforce org. Now, this is a really cool tool because it goes step by step through the process. So from planning to implementation to testing and then learning about the org after that. So there's loads more to learn about on MFA. So you can take the user authentication trailhead. There's also a rollout guide ebook. There's a setup MFA for your org video, as well as the MFA Trailblazer community group that you can access to get more information. All the links in this talk are going to be available at radnip.com/MFA. So click there to get the content and the links and the data. Also follow me on Twitter at @radnip. And also you can join admin2architect.com if you want to learn more about Salesforce. Otherwise, that's it, the end of the talk. I need to get back, getting ready to do the next set of talks. So long. I hope you liked the talk.